Female Qiang+Sweet Pet+Medical Concubine+Xuanxue+Shuangwen, there is a little pitiful person in Lu Mansion. After 10 years of hardship in the countryside, he returned to the capital once and his eldest daughter was taken over. His fiancée was also robbed and taken as a concubine, and he was smashed to death on the street. Xuanxue genius Lu Zhaoling woke up with his eyes open and ran into the arms of the Jin king, who even gave up 3 parts to the emperor. He immediately hugged himself with a thick leg. From then on, the pitiful little princess transformed into an arrogant princess. Her things are unlucky for whoever gets involved, her identity, who gains or loses, and the people she wants to protect cannot be taken away by the King of Hell.King Jin. The queen is so strong, can I still hold her legs? Chapter 1. Help Me Reborn. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Capital, Dusk, Alleys. A young girl stumbled forward, followed closely by several servants who looked like servants. Stinky girl, stop. The crown prince is waiting, don't let her run away. The girl's body was weak, with a red and swollen lump on her forehead. Her eyes began to blur, but she knew she couldn't let the other person grab her. She lived in the countryside for more than 10 years and was finally brought back to Beijing. Before even entering her home, she was pulled off the carriage and stuffed into a sedan chair with a heavy stick. The capital is so scary. After recovering from the dizziness caused by the beating, she jumped out of the sedan regardless of everything and ran frantically. Help, someone is forcibly robbing, said the commoner. A slave in the back heard her shout and angrily cursed, picking up a stone from the roadside and slamming it at her. The stone cut through the wind and hit her hard on the back of the head. Bang! Blood splattered out. The sharp pain came, and the girl's eyes turned black. Her body collapsed forward, and with the last moment of clarity, she crawled and rolled out of the alley. At this moment, a carriage happened to pass by the entrance of this alley. The girl pounced and immediately rolled into the front of the carriage. Oh! The horse pulling the cart was startled and hissed. The sudden change also made the surrounding people exclaim in surprise. The servants rushed out and didn't see the situation in front of them clearly. When they saw the girl lying in front of the carriage, they immediately went forward to arrest her. Before anyone can see this girl clearly, quickly get her back. The girl was grabbed by someone's shoulder, and in an instant on the brink of death, she burst out with her last strength. She suddenly broke free from him, turned around, climbed onto the carriage, and plunged into the carriage, hitting someone's chest. The coachman whipped away the servant and his pupils narrowed. Damn it, did that girl get into the carriage during this gap? In the carriage, a slender hand with distinct joints grabbed the girl's neck and pushed her away from his embrace. The girl clearly closed her eyes tightly and had no breath. Dead. Then just throw it out. Just as she was about to throw the corpse out of the carriage, the girl who was choked by her neck opened her eyes with a brush. In an instant, the gaze was cold and clear, with a frost-like killing intent. As soon as Lu Zhaoling, who had come back from death, opened her eyes and saw a heart-wrenching face. The purple jade crown with ink hair sets off the skin like snow. The long eyebrows are lightly dyed with light ink, and the eyes are like stars falling into the deep sea. The nose is straight like a peak, and the lips are like the most beautiful petals, but the corners of the lips are slightly cold, adding a touch of danger. The next second, Lu Zhaoling suddenly made a move and attacked his throat. Fingertips were as sharp as a sword, as if they were about to penetrate his throat. The stunning atmosphere instantly turned into a frenzy of killing intent. The hand pinching her neck suddenly gave a forceful squeeze, while the other hand grabbed Lu Zhaoling's wrist. Can a dead person still show their teeth and claws like this? Lu Zhaoling had a splitting headache and felt blood flowing from the back of his head. Listening to his deep voice, he looked up at his purple aura and the black mist slowly eroding it. Emperor Star Destiny. It turned out that his Emperor Star Purple Chi helped her to be reborn and come back to life from this little girl. Feeling his neck getting tighter and tighter, Lu Zhaoling pointed towards his chest and struggled to squeeze out a sentence. I can save you. The hand with distinct joints gave a slight pause and pulled her closer to him. The two of them were very close, and Lu Zhaoling smelled a refreshing scent from him. The two eyes collided at close range, as if sparks were popping up. How are you going to save this king? Lu Zhaoling had difficulty breathing. Let me stay by your side for half a year, and I will let you know how to save it. She needs time to recover, she needs his purple energy. Master, are you okay? The guards outside had already dismounted and gathered tightly in front of the carriage, looking at it with a tense expression. The car curtain is blocking, and they can't see what's inside, but it doesn't sound like there's any movement. Even so, none of them dared to step forward and lift the car curtain. Nothing, a deep voice came from the carriage. At this moment, a team of people and horses rushed over and fiercely stopped the carriage. The person is dressed in a gorgeous brocade robe, with a jade belt inlaid and embroidered with gold animal patterns. They wear a jade ring in their hands and have the words, power, written on their entire body. It's just that the bubble eyes are thick and the lips are thick, the face is slightly pale, a bit swollen, and the fundus of the eyes is grayish. It looks like a bag of wine and rice. It's the Crown Prince of Qingfu Marquis. The people on the roadside recognized him. Zhu Mingho, the Crown Prince of Qingfu Marquis' mansion, was favored by the Empress Dowager the most. He has always been domineering in the capital and no one dares to provoke him. The several domestic slaves who were chasing the girl just now quickly ran to Zhu Shizi's side and reported everything. Crown Prince, that girl is on the carriage. Crown Prince, this carriage looks unfamiliar to me. The young ones are afraid of causing trouble, so they didn't come forward to rob someone. Actually, I was scared when I saw the other side's guards with a commanding presence. Zhu Shizi looked at the carriage, tilted his eyes and scanned the four guards again, snorting in his nostrils. Those who look familiar to him. Bring him out to this Crown Prince. Everyone is about to come forward. Bold, the guard shouted angrily, the King of Jin has returned to the capital. Who dares to be reckless? As soon as this sentence was spoken, it was like a thunderbolt, causing everyone around to freeze. Jin King. 5 years ago, the King of Jin left the capital for rest and had no news for a long time, but now he has quietly returned to the capital. In the carriage, Lu Zhaoling sat in a corner, watching the man in front of him holding a handkerchief, carefully wiping his hands with elegant movements. Just now, his hand pinched her neck, it feels dirty. Lu Zhaoling's eyes darkened in waves and he had not yet fully adapted. She knew she had to rely on herself to get through the current crisis first. She endured nausea and vomiting, you won't lose out on this deal, after all, your life is very valuable. Without me to save you, you won't live for many years. This is her second time saying she can save him. Zhou Shiyue, the King of Jin, gave her a faint glance and said, you should first tell me, where does my king need your help? As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Zhaoling suddenly rushed towards him with extremely fast movements, reaching out and grabbing his collar with a sudden tug. Hiss. Zhou Shiyue's collar was pulled open, revealing her collarbone and a chest. He narrowed his pupils and grabbed her slender neck again, do you want to die? On the snow-white chest, eerie black mark suddenly appeared, like a monster hidden beneath the skin. Lu Zhaoling's finger poked it, and the black mark seemed to be alive. It shrank and the color instantly lightened a bit. Cough, are you sure you don't need me to save you? Lu Zhaoling was pinched by the neck, looking at him with a calm and confident gaze. Outside came the cry of Zhu Mingho, King Jin. I am Zhu Mingho from the Qingfu Marquis' mansion. That girl is my concubine. Please hand over the person quickly. At first, Zhu Mingho was startled when he heard that the King of Jin was also startled, but he quickly regained his senses. Even the King of Jin couldn't steal women from him on the street. When it comes to the Empress Dowager, she must be protecting him. Who wouldn't know that the Empress Dowager doesn't like the King of Jin? Do you want to pick up the concubine of this prince? Zhu Minghe shouted loudly and gave a glance to the group of servants, who immediately rushed over and stopped the 4 guards. Zhu Minghe quickly crawled to the front, brushed the floor, and pulled open the car curtain. Chapter 2. Beating Dogs Personally. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. A scene inside the carriage appeared before everyone's eyes. A young man dressed in a deep purple brocade robe lowered his head, his ink hair hanging lightly. A girl in a red dress lay in his arms, with one hand resting on his chest. The man's clothes were light and spacious, somewhat messy. Just like before lifting the car curtain, the atmosphere was a bit overwhelming, making people blush and heartbeat. The sharp-eyed people saw this scene clearly and immediately took a cold breath. No, that girl got into the carriage and became intimate with the King of Jin. Who the hell is this girl? With a brush sound, the car curtain was pulled down again, and the guards of the King of Jin had already kicked Zhu Minghe away. Please forgive me, Prince. The guards were also shocked to see this scene. How could their prince allow others to get close? Zhu Minghe got up from the ground, feeling both painful, anxious, and resentful. He jumped his feet and screamed loudly, King Jin, you're going too far. Surprisingly, you touched my concubine. You despicable girl, shameless, shameless. In the carriage, the King of Jin looked inexplicably, with a deep gaze at the girl who had already retreated. Little concubine. At this point, Lu Zhaoling had completely absorbed the chaotic memories in her mind. Is he also worthy? Half a year, do you need me to dedicate myself? His gaze swept over her figure. Lu Zhaoling's face turned black and she said, oh, you're thinking so beautifully. You've guarded your innocence for the past 6 months, and just like you are now, you'll die faster from getting involved in the bed matter. The little girl can say anything at home. The King of Jin lightly caressed a jade pendant around his waist, and his gaze turned to her hand. Just now, when her hand pressed against her chest, the eerie black figure shrank, and the cold that had been tormenting him all along dissipated a bit. Lu Zhaoling calmly allowed him to watch, his gaze not dodging or retreating. The two of them fought silently, but surprisingly they were evenly matched. The King of Jin suddenly chuckled lightly. Just because of your courage, for the next 6 months, you will be protected by the king. Outside, there came Zhu Minghe's furious cries. He was stopped by the guards and could no longer come forward, so he could only curse loudly. Bitch, why don't you hurry down and beg for mercy from this crown prince? You're all dirty, except for me. Who else wants you in the future? If you don't want to get married or not, just roll down and lick my crown prince's shoes, and obediently go back to be my concubine. Haha. Lu Zhaoling heard the whispers of the people outside. This matter has escalated, and there is a real possibility that she may have a bad reputation and a tragic ending. Zhu Minghe's idea was to force her to go back with him. The problem is that as soon as she entered the city, she was targeted by Zhu Minghe and even prepared a sedan chair to accurately kidnap people. If we say that the Lu family did not have any internal demons, she really doesn't believe it. Returning to the Lu family like this, waiting for her is not a good outcome. King Jin looked at her and said, do you still have the strength? Do you want to go out and beat the dog with your own hands? Qingfu Marquis' mansion, can you cover it up? Lu Zhaoling asked in reverse. The King of Jin smiled proudly. Just hit me, kill me, I can hold on to it. Lu Zhaoling suddenly lifted the car curtain and stood out, allowing people to see her clearly. Her hair was disheveled, her forehead was red and swollen, and there was blood on the back of her head, making her look very disheveled. Zhu Minghe, you kidnapped people first. How dare you speak nonsense to tarnish my reputation? You don't even look at yourself. Your face is pale, your skin is swollen, your eyes are blue and gray, and you look short-lived. I admire you. Zhu Minghe looked at Lu Zhaoling and felt a bit obsessed for a moment. Although she has a wound on her forehead and looks disheveled, it does not detract from her beauty. Her goose face, apricot eyes, rosy lips, delicate chin, and slender white neck make her look too outstanding. The legitimate daughter of the Lu family, who has been raised in the countryside for 10 years, is so beautiful. How could she be like a small village maid? Zhu Mingho's anger was mostly extinguished by her beauty, and as he watched her show a fragile and beautiful appearance with injuries, his blood boiled. I just need to look up to you. He remembered someone who had come up with a good excuse for him. If he was caught during the kidnapping, he would say so, ensuring that he could tarnish the reputation of this girl and nail her to death on him, making it impossible to escape. It was clearly the villains who kidnapped you, but I saved you. If it weren't for me, you would have been ruined by the villains long ago. You said at that time that you wanted to give your life as a gesture of gratitude, crying and shouting to marry this prince. Everyone's eyes widened even wider. But this prince has a noble status and already has a fiancée. How can he marry you? You can say you can be a concubine yourself, as long as you can be by my side. You even said you want to have 3 children for me, you can't deny it. There was a low laugh in the carriage. Lu Zhaoling turned around and saw the man's index finger slightly bent against his lips. Have you had a good time watching the play? Zhu Mingho shouted at the top of his throat, King Jin, have you heard me? I'm generous, I won't mind what happened just now, but you can't help her. Hurry up and get her off the carriage. For the sake of this girl's beauty, he didn't mind that she had already been embraced by the King of Jin just now. Why, you don't have the strength to beat the dog. King Jin looked at Lu Zhaoling and raised his eyebrows lightly. Lu Zhaoling could see a hint of mockery from his expression. He may want to see if she really has the courage to physically attack the Crown Prince of Qingfu. I also want to see if she has the ability to beat up Zhu Mingho. If she were to be thrown off the carriage now, she would immediately faint. As soon as Lu Zhaoling reached out, the whip in the driver's hand had already reached her. She stood on the shaft of the carriage and swung her whip fiercely towards Zhu Mingho. Shoo! The sound of whips breaking through the air is chilling. Zhu Mingho's pupils narrowed and he exclaimed in shock, how dare you hit this prince? Are you tired of living? Ah! The whip hit his shoulder firmly, with such force that it caused him to tilt his shoulder and fall to the ground. A good person is not worth it. If you insist on being a villain who is not as good as a dog, it will be you. The whip in Lu Zhaoling's hand was whipped again, causing the air to snap. Every whip hit Zhu Mingho, causing him to scream in pain. You're looking for death. Ah! Are you all dead? Zhu Mingho hugged his head and shouted anxiously at his servants. Qing Feng. The voice of the King of Jin came, who dares to step forward, kill. The guard Qing Feng responded in a solemn voice, yes. The families in the whole mansion hesitated for a moment and dared not step forward. Pop pop pop. With a whip from Lu Zhaoling, Zhu Mingho really cried. He lay on the ground, so painful that he couldn't get up and was almost choked to death. Wait for this prince, I can't spare you. Upon hearing his words, Lu Zhaoling's eyes dimmed. Waiting for the Marquis's mansion to come and seek revenge. The King of Jin promised to protect her. Just now you also saw that King Jin and I have long been in love, destined for life. King Jin is my fiancé, so if you want to trouble me, you need to weigh your options. Wow! The eyes of the people around were about to burst out, and some couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Royal Palace Guard. Ah! 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 Fiancé, puff. Zhu Mingho spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. The King of Jin's eyes were stained with frost, and he was about to speak when Lu Zhaoling threw the whip back to Qing Feng and turned around to smash it into his arms. Faint out. King Jin. Let's go, he ordered in a low voice. The carriage immediately galloped away. The servants of Qingfu Marquis's mansion quickly went to lift Zhu Mingho with a mournful expression. Crown Prince, wake up. That's it, the Crown Prince won't be killed, will he? Chapter 3. Daughter's Courage. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Prince, are you going back to the royal mansion? The guard and coachman Qingfeng looked at the dark sky and asked. If we bring this girl back to the royal mansion for the night after this incident today, then, however, there was no sound of that young girl coming from the carriage. Shouldn't she have been directly strangled by the prince? Is he going to throw the body later? Qingfeng thought haphazardly, and after a while, he heard the voice of his own prince. Go to the Lu family. Yes. After a while, the voice of King Jin rang out again. Let the assistant doctor go too. Lu Fu. The maid Qiuju rushed over with her skirt in hand, arriving before anyone could hear her. Miss, it's not good anymore. Lu Zhaoling was startled and the needle in his hand pricked his finger, causing a drop of bright red blood to emerge. A sense of unease arose in her heart. What are we doing? Who's not doing well? Lu Zhaoling angrily glared at Qiuju who rushed in. Miss and Miss have returned to the mansion. Qiuju gasped for breath and stuttered slightly. Who are you calling Mississippi? Lu Zhaoling stood up, instantly enraged. Lu Fu, she is the Mississippi. Qiuju was frightened by her fierce expression and quickly changed her mind. I'm wrong, it's Miss Air. Miss Air has returned to the mansion. How could she come back at this time? Lu Zhaoling shouted out in silence. Really? The masters and ladies are all welcoming each other in the front hall. Do you want my parents to personally greet her? She has such a big face. Lu Zhaoling bit his lower lip. I'll go take a look. She immediately rushed out of the door. Wait, Miss Air was sent back by King Jin. Qiuju quickly chased after her. The front hall of Lu Mansion. Lu will be around 40 next year. He is young, handsome, and has a human-like appearance. Madame Lu is shining with jewels and beautiful clothes, and she looks just in her 30s. The two of them were looking at Qingfeng, feeling a bit confused. This young man, did you say that King Jin brought the little girl back? It was right at the door. Qingfeng remained expressionless and said, yes, Miss Lu Zhaoling is the daughter of an adult, isn't she? Lu Ming's heart skipped a beat and he said, indeed, she is my immature daughter. Where is she? Miss Lu is feeling unwell, please find 2 people to go out and help her. Mrs. Lu's eyes widened and she dared not think. She can't come in by herself when she reaches the doorstep, and she still needs someone to help her. How could a child raised in the countryside be so spoiled? It's really outrageous. Qingfeng glanced at her and felt that Lu Zhaoling did not look at all like Mrs. Lu. Lu Ming scolded her in a low voice, why are you arguing? Didn't you hear that the King of Jin brought her back? He quickly called 2 servants over and straightened his robes. Go and welcome the King of Jin, he said. Qingfeng stopped him and looked at the 2 servants. Mr. Lu is planning for them to help Miss Lu. 2 men going to help. Is Lord Lu joking? Right. When I heard that King Jin had returned to the capital, I was so excited that my mind was not clear. Madam, why don't you hurry and call 2 maids? Lu Ming reacted. She has a lot of things to do. From my perspective, she must be trying to make us personally go to the gate to meet her. Mrs. Lu whispered, gritting her teeth. A group of people rushed towards the gate. Lu Zhaoling rushed over and immediately followed. She took Mrs. Lu's arm and said, Mom, did the King of Jin really send his second sister back? King Jin, they are not familiar with each other. But Lu Zhaoling knew that Shenxiang's daughter had been thinking about the King of Jin since childhood. Miss Shen is the leader of noble women in the capital, and the man she misses must be extraordinary. I don't know how she hooked up. It's really raised in the countryside, without rules, without face, without skin. Mrs. Lu gritted her teeth. They rushed to the gate and saw the low-key carriage in front of them. Lu Ming had some foresight. Although the carriage looked simple and unadorned, it looked sturdy and spacious, with top-quality wood and rare horses for pulling. He put away his carelessness and quickly approached to salute. "Officer Lu Ming, I have met the King of Jin and respectfully welcome him back to the capital. Although I didn't see anyone through the car curtain, who dares to impersonate a prince casually." In the carriage, the King of Jin looked at the girl who was still unconscious and extended his index finger, poking her swollen forehead. The person didn't move and his head was poking and shaking. Lord Lu raised a brave daughter. The sound came out like a feather lightly tickling Lu Zhaoling's heart, and she curiously opened her eyes to look at the carriage. "Is this the voice of King Jin? The sound is so beautiful." However, Lu Ming's face changed. Does this sentence from the King of Jin mean to be held accountable? What did Lu Zhaoling do? He felt a bit flustered in his heart. King Jin was not easy to deal with back then. "Your Highness, I have raised my daughter in the countryside since childhood. She must have had a rough temperament and a plain speech. If there is any offense against the Highness will only punish her." The King of Jin looked at the dizzy girl and let out a sunburn. "It's obvious that my father doesn't hurt or love my mother, and I don't know what happened. I'll first charge her myself." "Ha." The King of Jin chuckled lightly and pushed the person out. "Later, the assistant doctor will come to treat her injury. Before she wakes up, take good care of her. After all, but his fiancée A.E. When she wakes up, he will talk to her about the issue of unmarried couples." Qing Feng signaled, and the two maids quickly stepped forward to help others. Lu Zhaoling was helped down and couldn't stand at all. Two maids gritted their teeth and supported her. Mrs. Lu and Lu Zhaoyun both looked at her. Lu Ming also glanced at it, hiss. "Are people so miserable? Shouldn't it have been beaten by the King of Jin? Beat him half to death, send him back to save him, and beat him again when he wakes up." At that moment, Lord Lu felt that he had already figured out the King of Jin. This must be someone with a violent temperament and cruel and ruthless methods. Yes, I will definitely have someone take good care of her," Lu Ming said quickly. "Why don't you help Miss Er in?" The carriage turned around and left. "Let people wait for the assistant doctor," Lu Ming instructed the butler. "Master, the King of Jin has beaten her like this. Why do you still invite the auxiliary doctor to treat her injury? The auxiliary doctor is not something that everyone can hire. Mrs. Lu is a bit jealous. The auxiliary doctor retired from the Imperial physician. He had a childhood friendship with the Emperor, who gave him a thin face. He had superb medical skills, but as he grew older, he easily refused to go out for consultations. Madame Lu prepared a heavy gift before and couldn't even enter the door. Now it's surprising that the auxiliary doctor should come to treat Lu Zhaoling's injury in person. Where did that girl get her big face? The King of Jin must have cured the person and punished him severely. Lu Zhaoling is in trouble. Lu Ming's face remained calm. Lu Zhaoyun's eyes rolled and he said, "Dad, I'll go see second sister and first ask what happened. Don't let her implicate you. Zhao Yun is still sensible and considerate." "Alright, Dad has handed her over to you," said Lu Ming with relief. A bowl of cold water poured onto Lu Zhaoling's face. Chapter 4. Is it still innocent? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lu Zhaoling woke up and as soon as she opened her eyes, she felt her chin being forcefully pinched. Her face was lifted. Lu Zhaoyun looked at her face, his forehead injured and his face splashed with water. It was so beautiful that it made her sour as if she had eaten several green oranges. Second sister is really skilled. Lu Zhaoling patted her hand and glanced at the room. The narrow room, dilapidated furniture, unpainted bed frames, and faded curtains. A small round table and 4 worn small round stools. This can't be the Jin prince's mansion, can it? How could there be such a shabby royal mansion? Upon hearing the young girl in front of her call her second sister again, Lu Zhaoling realized that this should be the Lu mansion. Did the king of Jin send me back? She asked, reaching out to wipe the water off her face. Did you spill it? Lu Zhaoyun didn't expect Lu Zhaoling to wake up with such a calm reaction. He instinctively replied, so what if I spilled it? Well, that's it. Lu Zhaoling raised her hand and slapped her face. Pop. A slap landed firmly on Lu Zhaoyun's face, with a crisp voice. Lu Zhaoyun was stunned by the beating, but when she realized it, she immediately became furious and screamed in disbelief. Lu Zhaoling. How dare you hit me? I'm your sister. The maid Qiuju was also stunned. Previously, there was a letter from the countryside stating that Lu Zhaoling had a very unpleasant temperament in the countryside over the years, like a smooth-mouthed gourd, with no temper or laughter, and worked hard every day just to have 2 full meals. She must have been nervous and uncomfortable when she entered the capital, unable to adapt well, and like a country bumpkin, she would have shrunk her neck and looked at people in the eye. But now, apart from looking a bit disheveled and pitiful, how could Lu Zhaoling's behavior be any more like what was described in the letter? Qiuju couldn't help but tug at Lu Zhaoyun's sleeve and whispered, "Miss, shouldn't you have made a mistake? Is she really Miss Heir?" When Lu Zhaoyun was asked such a question, his heart suddenly surged. She took a deep breath, forced herself to suppress her anger, covered her slapped face with one hand, and stared at Lu Zhaoling. "Say, are you Lu Zhaoling? Why, no one from Lu Mansion knows what I look like so far." Lu Zhaoling sat down on the chair and reached out to touch the back of her head, frowning. After she passed out, she must have stayed with the king of Jin in the carriage and been nurtured by his purple energy for a while. Now, her spirit has slightly improved. But he didn't care about the injury on her head and just sent her back to the Lu Mansion. Isn't it too irresponsible? Lu Zhaoling deducted 2 points from the king of Jin in his heart. The king of Jin originally had a top-notch appearance and figure, which could be counted as 100 points. However, he had a cold and ruthless temperament, and his murderous aura was too strong, which was reduced by 10 points. Now, regardless of her injuries, he directly threw her back to the Lu Mansion and further reduced by 10 points. Well, there are only 80 points left. Lu Zhaoyun gritted his teeth and looked at Lu Zhaoling. It's already like this, why can she still maintain a calm posture? You were sent to the countryside at the age of 6, and now it's completely different from when you were young. Who can recognize you? So, regardless of whether or not to ask for 10 years, no one has gone to take a look, and there's still reason. Upon hearing Lu Zhaoling's words, Lu Zhaoyun also confirmed her identity. I guess so, who would be foolish enough to impersonate a completely unpopular Miss Lu from the Lu family? Lu Zhaoyun thought of the promise she had just made to her father that she would figure things out. She took a deep breath and swallowed the slap. Why are you with the king of Jin when your parents have sent someone to pick you up? Lu Zhaoling was dizzy and didn't make a sound. Looking at her, Lu Zhaoyun guessed maliciously, "Second sister, shouldn't you have met a villain halfway through?" She exaggeratedly exclaimed and covered her mouth, "Oh my goodness, did those villains hit you? How did they touch you? Second sister, do you have any other injuries on you?" Lu Zhaoling looked at her and saw the clear malice on her face. "What do you want to say? Second sister, if you really encounter that kind of thing, just tell me. I will go find my dad and make sure he finds those villains to avenge you." Lu Zhaoling couldn't help but laugh. "Do you want to ask, have I been mistreated?" "Hush, are you speaking so bluntly?" Lu Zhaoyun's face couldn't help but turn red, but his eyes lit up, wishing it was true. "I have disappointed you, I am very well, even more innocent than you," said Lu Zhaoling. If it weren't for her body not recovering yet, Lu Zhaoyun would have kicked her out long ago. "Second sister, you can't hide this kind of thing. If it's really tainted, you need to have someone prepare a pill to avoid it. Otherwise, if you get pregnant with the flesh and blood of the villain, you will be sunk in the pond. Zhao Yun, the auxiliary doctor, is here. Has your sister woken up? Mrs. Lu's voice came from outside the door. Lu Zhaoling was surprised and said, "How could Dr. Fu come so quickly?" "Mother, please ask the assistant doctor to come in. Second sister is awake." Lu Ming and Mrs. Lu walked in with an old man with gray hair and beard. Lu Zhaoling's gaze swept over the three of them. The appearance of Lu Ming and Mrs. Lu is not much different from what I remember. It seems that they lived a very comfortable life in the capital, not much old, but rather they were both proud and wealthy and relaxed. And as soon as the old man entered, Lu Zhaoling smelled a faint fragrance of medicine, indicating that he was indeed a doctor. However, there was a faint black-gray aura slowly swirling around the old man's forehead. Lu Zhaoling's gaze froze and he looked straight at the assistant doctor. As soon as the assistant doctor came in, he saw Lu Zhaoling first. If Zhou Shiyue could send someone to pick him up before even entering the royal mansion, he must not be an ordinary little girl. Now, as expected. This girl has a pair of beautiful eyes, especially lively. Didn't you say you were seriously injured? Why wasn't the person lying in bed? The auxiliary doctor asked in a deep voice. Madame Lu quickly gave Lu Zhaoyun a glance. Zhao Yun has seen the assistant doctor before. She showed a standard smile and saluted the assistant doctor Ying. Unexpectedly, the assistant doctor didn't give her a good face at all. What's the point of being a guest at this time? I'm talking about that little girl. Lu Zhaoling did not know the assistant doctor, but upon seeing the reaction of the Lu family, she immediately understood that this was not an ordinary doctor, and it was highly likely that he was invited by the King of Jin. Well, I didn't forget to hire a doctor for her, plus 5 points. Dr. Fu, I was just persuading my younger sister to lie down on the bed, but she didn't know what kind of stimulation she was experiencing and kept people away. Could she have encountered something bad? Lu Zhaoyun sounded very worried. The assistant doctor's face darkened. Madame Lu's eyes rolled and she immediately rushed towards Lu Zhaoling, crying and shouting. My dear daughter, after this incident, how can you talk about marriage and meet people in the future? Chapter 5. Do you have a headache? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Is this going to ruin her innocence? Lu Zhaoling's gaze was cold, and Mrs. Lu had already pounced in front of her, squeezing out 2 tears. She grabbed the empty bowl on the table and threw it at Mrs. Lu. Ah! Mrs. Lu's face turned pale with fear, and she instinctively twisted aside to avoid it, only hearing a click. Oh my waist, my waist! She screamed in agony and called for the maid to help her. Lu Ming was furious and pointed at Lu Zhaoling, you wicked woman. How dare you take action against your mother? Isn't my mother dead? She's a woman who comes knocking on the door and crawls on the bed, deserves me to call her mother. Lu Zhaoling remained expressionless. Lu Ming's face changed. Mrs. Lu froze and looked at Lu Zhaoling incredulously. After realizing it, she immediately covered her face and started crying. Master, I'm not alive anymore. Woo-woo. How could Zhaoling slander me so much? Lu Ming supported her and glared at Lu Zhaoling, those who grew up in the countryside are crude and reckless. These days, you give me. Cough, cough. There were 2 coughs next to it. Lu Ming suddenly woke up. Dr. Fu is still here, how can outsiders see his family's jokes? He reluctantly regained his composure and said apologetically to the assistant doctor, I really made the assistant doctor laugh. Lu, this wicked woman, has been raised in the countryside all along. She just came back today and her words and actions have nothing to do with you. Please forgive me. The assistant doctor's beard trembled and he said, I came to treat Miss Lu on behalf of the King of Jin, not to see you making a fuss. Yes, yes, please, auxiliary doctor. Master, I twisted my waist. Can you ask Dr. Fu to show me first? It hurts so much. Mrs. Lu twisted her body and couldn't stand straight, whispering to Lu Ming. Wait a moment, Lu Ming said calmly. The auxiliary doctor now represents the King of Jin. Dr. Fu walked up to Lu Zhaoling and said, let me see your injury. Thank you very much. The auxiliary doctor's face changed when he saw the redness and swelling on Lu Zhaoling's forehead, and he was even more shocked when he saw the wound on the back of her head. That's not right, such a serious injury, the blood flowing through her hair and back collar. The wound is so deep, she is still alive. Dr. Fu had seen a similar deceased person before, who was so severely hit in the back of the head and died at that time. Now Lu Zhaoling can still sit here. The big bump on her forehead is very serious. He gave Lu Zhaoling a pulse, which was so weak that it was almost imperceptible. This pulse is in line with the condition of the injury. It was originally a fatal injury, but she is still alive. Strange thing, the assistant doctor murmured, then changed his hand to diagnose the pulse again, and the result was still the same. He stared at Lu Zhaoling with wide eyes. With this pulse, even if she doesn't die, she's already unconscious. Why is she still sitting here sober? How do you feel now? Dizziness, weakness, pain, said Lu Zhaoling. The assistant doctor quickly called the attendant and asked him to open the medicine box, and his movements became faster. The person was injured so badly that Lord Lu's family was still arguing and scolding her. He really has a lot of knowledge. This girl is really pitiful to have such a dear father on her stall. Go fetch a basin of hot water. Dr. Fu's tone became irritable towards the Lu family. Didn't you see how much blood she had shed? Lu Ming came over to take a look and immediately took a cold breath. Lu Zhaoling's thick black hair was like a cloud, and he didn't pay attention to the bleeding. How did it hurt? He turned to Mrs. Lu, didn't someone go pick her up? Where are those people? Madame Lu supported her waist and choked up, Master, I don't know. I've arranged everything very well. Who knows what happened on the way? The assistant doctor gave Lu Zhaoling a pulse and carefully examined her head, her eyebrows furrowed to the point of trapping the fly. I have hemostatic and stasis relieving powder here, but the effect is a bit strong. Applying it will cause a lot of pain. Can you resist it? This is the medicine he concocted, usually given to those soldiers and generals. The effect is very good, but it will be particularly painful, and many men cannot bear it. Can. Lu Zhaoling didn't say a word of nonsense. The assistant doctor gave her a surprised look. It was only at this moment that he realized that such a serious injury must have hurt so much, but she remained expressionless. Is this girl unconscious? The assistant doctor applied medicine to her and then wrapped the wound with a white cloth. You've been hit hard on the head. I don't know if there will be any blood stasis inside. You must remember to stay in bed these days and take it easy when you get up. If you feel uncomfortable, you have to go to the doctor. Now I'll give you acupuncture and moxibustion to make your blood flow as smooth as possible. When Dr. Fu mentioned these things, Lu Zhaoling felt that his medical skills were indeed very good. The medicine has now started to take effect and the blood has stopped, but the wound is burning and painful. Okay. Does it hurt? The assistant doctor couldn't help but ask. Pain, but tolerable. Hiss. Men can all grin in pain, how could she tolerate it? Lu Zhaoling looked at the black hair in the assistant doctor's forehead and said, have you been having headaches lately? The assistant doctor was shocked. Mrs. Lu, who had been waiting all along, immediately erupted upon hearing these words. What nonsense! You even asked the assistant doctor in reverse. Lu Zhaoyun also followed suit and said, Second sister, is there someone like you who curses Dr. Fu like this? He himself is a doctor, how could he possibly have a headache? I really have a headache, I cured it on my own. You ask them all to go out, Lu Zhaoling said to the assistant doctor. Now his words are more effective than hers. Lu Ming's face sank and he said, Zhaoling, can you stop playing around? Please ask Lord Lu to take them out, the assistant doctor interrupted him. Lu Ming was taken aback. Why does the auxiliary doctor really listen to this wicked woman? But they had no choice but to retreat. The assistant doctor's attendants were guarding the door, looking at Lu Zhaoling with a strange expression. Miss Lu, how can you tell that I've been having frequent headaches lately? Lu Zhaoling pointed to the middle of his forehead and said, Here, there's a sense of stillness. Dead air. The assistant doctor looked at her in a daze and soon shook his head in a smirk. I have been experiencing frequent headaches lately, and I can't diagnose any problems at all. However, my own body knows that my deadline is approaching. My body is running out of oil and may not be able to come and change your dressing in a few days. He has been suffering from headaches for the past few days, with a feeling of inexplicably knowing that his end is approaching. He had quietly arranged everything behind him and had been waiting in the mansion for that moment to come. Unexpectedly, he was summoned by the King of Jin to treat the girl. Is it fate to be the last patient in this life? In addition, Lu Zhaoling's calm and indifferent reaction made him unable to resist telling her the truth. Do you have any jade on you? Asked Lu Zhaoling. Jade. Lu Zhaoling nodded and said seriously, I'll help you transfer that strand of death energy onto the jade, so you won't die. The assistant doctor laughed heartily. Why are you still teasing the elderly, little girl? Chapter 6. That's deadly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Trying it won't do you any harm. Lu Zhaoling's gaze turned and she had already seen his jade pendant. That's it, the jade is of decent quality. The assistant doctor picked up his jade pendant in surprise. This jade pendant was given to him by his grandson, and the quality of the jade was quite good. If she had been raised in the countryside all along, could she calmly say that this jade was only acceptable? Your medical skills are good, it's a pity to die like this, said Lu Zhaoling again. The assistant doctor burst into laughter and took off the jade pendant, handing it to Lu Zhaoling. Well, this girl is interesting. Let's just coax her. She's even younger than a grandson. You sit down. Lu Zhaoling took the jade pendant in his left hand, lightly scratched the void in his right hand, and pressed his finger on his forehead. In her gaze, the black aura swirling around the assistant doctor's forehead seemed to come alive, twisted and struggling like a frightened earthworm. But it was held down by Lu Zhaoling's fingers, and after a while, it couldn't move and wrapped around her fingers. The assistant doctor instantly felt that his heavy head, which had been feeling dizzy and heavy these days, suddenly relaxed. This contrast is too obvious for him to ignore. Lu Zhaoling lightly pressed her finger against the jade pendant, and made a gentle swipe. The black aura slowly seeped into the jade pendant. She placed the jade pendant on the table. You just watch. The assistant doctor's gaze fell on the jade pendant. Suddenly, click. That jade pendant shattered right in front of him. The originally intact jade pendant was instantly cut into countless pieces like a spider web. This. The auxiliary doctor was shocked. This jade pendant was still in his hand just now. When he handed it to Lu Zhaoling, she just gently held it in her hand and placed it gently on the table. Even martial artists with deep internal strength cannot do this, can they? Alright, your head won't hurt anymore, said Lu Zhaoling. The assistant doctor reached out and touched his forehead. Before, when he didn't have an attack, his forehead always felt a faint pain, which became more pronounced when he pressed it down. Now he rubbed and pressed, and surprisingly, there was no longer that stuffy pain. He suddenly looked up at Lu Zhaoling. Although she was just a teenage girl, he saw the silence and unfathomability of the elderly in her expression. The assistant doctor asked in shock, Miss Lu, what did you say that was just now? He couldn't see it. Dead air. Dead air, where did it come from? Lu Zhaoling reminded him, some people are indeed dying and giving birth to a sense of stillness, but yours is not. Think about what strange places you have been to before experiencing a headache, or what strange things you have come into contact with. Her head began to feel dizzy, and her stomach began to growl. Just now, she withdrew a small wisp of dead energy, which made her feel that her strength and spirit were both empty. She hasn't recovered yet, she's really weak. Since it was the King of Jin who sent you here, I'll just pretend to be a tiger. Could you please ask Lu Ming to prepare another yard for me, stew some ginseng chicken soup, and arrange a clever maid for me? After finishing these words, Lu Zhaoling was already lying weakly on the table. The assistant doctor was so shocked that he immediately shouted, "Mr. Lu! Lu Ming, hurry in! Dr. Fu, I am a wicked woman." The assistant doctor interrupted him with a series of questioning. "Lord Lu has really broadened my horizons. Miss Lu is really your own daughter. Are you, the Lu family, so poor that you can't afford it?" Lu Ming was shocked and said, "No, where did this start? If it weren't for being frugal and stingy, what kind of shabby house is this for Miss Lu? The King of Jin instructed you to take good care of people, and that's how you take care of them. When I report to the prince, can Lord Lu handle his anger?" Lu Ming's face changed. "Immediately change Miss Lu's room, and bring her a ginseng from 30 years old to stew with chicken soup, and arrange for a clever maid to take care of her personally." The assistant doctor looked at Lu Zhaoling, who was lying on the table. He really felt a little distressed for the girl. The old man will give her the medicine. She is seriously injured, and the medicinal materials must be of high quality and of good vintage. The diagnosis is expensive, and Lord Lu must prepare the silver. Just tidy up this room. There aren't any extra empty rooms in the mansion, Mrs. Lu said wrongly outside the door. The assistant doctor snorted coldly and said, "Isn't the other Miss Lu unharmed? If there's really no other room, let them exchange." Lu Zhaoyun's face changed. "Do you want her to let Qixia courtyard out?" "Mother." Lu Zhaoyun tugged at Mrs. Lu's sleeve. Lu Ming looked at the appearance of the assistant doctor and understood that he had to take care of this matter today. He couldn't help but glare at his wife. Why arrange for Lu Zhaoling to stay in such an old house where a wet nurse lives, even though there are other courtyards in the mansion? Rumors spread that made him lose face. "Someone, please settle Miss Eyre in the Tingmuan building. Madam, why don't you order the kitchen to stew chicken soup for Zhaoling?" Mrs. Lu saw Lu Ming's angry expression and knew it was not the time to make a scene. She could only swallow her anger and responded, then said to Lu Zhaoyun, "Help your second sister over." Lu Zhaoyun also gritted his back teeth. The auxiliary doctor was not at ease and followed him to Tingmuan building. This is a warm pavilion built by Lu Fu in the south wing. Although it is not large, it is exquisitely decorated and comfortable inside. You can see a garden of flowers and plants by pushing the window, which is quite a good place. Lu Zhaoyun helped Lu Zhaoling to the bed and gritted his teeth against her ear, saying, "You won't be able to stay in this place for a few days." Lu Zhaoling glanced at her and ignored her, lying on the bed and closing her eyes. She can finally lie down and rest. But Lu Zhaoyun is still standing beside Bibi. "Don't think you've climbed up to the King of Jin. I heard he's cold and ruthless. It's impossible for him to save someone halfway and send them home. He definitely doesn't know how to deal with you yet. When he thinks it over, you'll have to endure it. Who caused the injury on your head? Didn't those people really do anything else? If you don't speak up, you'll let others spread it out loud, and our family won't be able to help you. Get out," Lu Zhaoling said in a low voice. Lu Zhaoyun gritted his teeth, stomped his feet, and ran out. She needs to go out and inquire about what went wrong. Prince Jin's mansion. The butler led the whole house up and down, facing him at the entrance. "Welcome the prince back to the capital." The butler looked at the King of Jin with tears in his eyes. "Prince." A meticulously styled maid led two dignified maids forward, with tears in their eyes. Qing Mama. King Jin glanced at her and shifted his gaze to the two maids. Seeing the prince paying attention to the two of them, Grandma Qing felt a little happy. Can the prince see the woman in his eyes? She quickly said, Prince, these are the two big maids that the old servant has trained for you. Follow the Qingfeng-Qingzi generation and name them Qingling and Qingyin. Let them serve you in the future. Qingling and Qingyin walked up and bowed. I pay my respects to the prince. Do you understand martial arts? The king of Jin asked in a low voice. I am skilled in swords, said Qingling. My servant's likeness skills are better, said Qingyin. The king of Jin nodded and said, pack your bags and go to the Lu mansion. Follow Miss Lu in the future. Chapter 7. File the complaint. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Grandma Qing was completely confused. Qingfeng, if someone sends them over, it's my king's intention. Yes. Qingling and Qingyin couldn't react either, but they had been taught to be loyal to the king of Jin for the past decade and must obey any orders from the king of Jin. Although they were confused, they bowed and retreated, preparing to go to the Lu mansion. The king of Jin got off the carriage, with his sleeves behind him, and looked up at the three characters of the Jin prince's mansion on the door plaque, his gaze unclear. The butler and Qing Mama both looked at his legs with fear. Prince, how is your leg? As usual, it's okay to take a few slow steps. King Jin stepped into the door. Is that just that there hasn't been any improvement? The butler and Qing Mama exchanged a glance and let out a deep sigh before quickly following in. Qing Mama suppressed the urge to help King Jin and looked at him with heartache. King Jin was raised by her, and she felt the most heartbroken. Prince, Qingling and Qingyin are sensible and obedient, diligent and responsible. The old servant thought that there was no one in your room and someone had to wait on them. How did he send them out? Is there anything wrong with the second miss of the Lu mansion? Qing Mama thought something was wrong with Miss Lu. The king of Jin wanted Qingling and Qingyin to keep an eye on her, completely afraid to think otherwise. It's just this kind of job. Just send someone else to do it. Qingling and Qingyin are specifically trained and taught by her for the prince. She also hopes that the two maids can become members of the prince's family. The image of Lu Zhaoling came to the mind of King Jin. What's wrong with it? That girl is not right anywhere. Miss Lu is my fiancé he said. What did the prince say? Cough, cough, cough. Qing Mama coughed fiercely in shock. Fiancé The butler also let out a quack like an old duck being choked. When did the prince have a fiancé How come they don't know? Well, it's just confirmed, on the way. The king of Jin couldn't help but lift his lips inexplicably as he thought of his previous experience. He looked down at his collar and remembered the scene where Lu Zhaoling decisively pulled open his clothes. His Adam's apple rolled. The butler and Qing Mama were stunned. Qing Mama is even going to cover her heart. This stimulation is too intense and sudden, it's a bit unbearable. Prince, didn't you say that being filled with mediocre and vulgar powder in the capital is boring? The butler was stuttering. The Empress Dowager has never given up in all these years. She has wanted to marry the prince several times, saying that one was disliked by the prince. Now that the prince is already 20 years old, seeing that the candidate for the Jin princess is still hopeless, suddenly she has an additional fiancé Oh my God, who can believe this? Well, I met someone who wasn't that vulgar. The king of Jin sat down. Is it Miss Lu from the Lu mansion? Qing Mama's eyes lit up. Has the prince taken a liking to her? The king of Jin tapped his fingers lightly on the table and shook his head. She fell in love with me and volunteered to marry me, he said. Even when he fainted, he hit him directly in the arms. Lu Zhaoling. Feng Ping was harmed. Qing Mama covered her jumping heart and said, "Is it Mr. Lu Ming's residence? I have seen 3 young ladies from his family, and my impression is very average. Lord, you probably don't have a strong taste, do you? And besides the young lady, the other 2 are illegitimate daughters. The illegitimate daughter of the Lu family wants to become the princess of Jin. This identity is too far apart. It is said to be the second Mississippi. That's the illegitimate daughter of the Lu family, looking very angry at the young family. Prince. Qing Mama was about to cry, "Do you want to stop considering it?" The King of Jin chuckled lightly. "Mammy, it's the second miss who just returned to Beijing from the countryside. You probably haven't seen her before. Is it raised in the countryside?" Qing Mama first breathed a sigh of relief, then raised her heart. "Do Lord Lu still have someone raised in the countryside? I'll leave this matter to you. I'll rest for a while and enter the palace to have the emperor give me a marriage," said the King of Jin, his finger touching his chest. There, once touched by a cold hand. The girl who said she could save his life, it's a bit fun. "Prince, the auxiliary doctor is here." The King of Jin looked at the assistant doctor who hurried in. "I have seen the prince." The assistant doctor, who was quite irritable and arrogant in front of the Lu family, almost burst into tears when he saw the King of Jin. He thought he couldn't wait for the day when the King of Jin returned to the capital in his lifetime. Unexpectedly, not only did he wait, but he couldn't die. "Dr. Fu, haven't seen you for many years, are you still okay?" "Returning to the prince, I used to be bad, but now I'm okay," said the auxiliary doctor excitedly. King Jin was taken aback and said, The assistant doctor approached, and both the butler and Qing Mama looked at each other. They both stepped down at the same time. There was no one else in the room, and the assistant doctor had a straight expression. "Prince, did you know that Miss Lu was special, so you asked me to go and treat her injury?" He said, "The Prince of Jin in his youth was already cold and indifferent to death. How could he be so kind? Special." The King of Jin looked at him. "Can we say that the auxiliary doctor also needs her help? That's not just special, it's mysterious. I've been confused all the way." The assistant doctor explained the matter in detail and reached out to press his forehead. "If it were someone else, I wouldn't believe it at all, but this happened to me personally. I really felt a lot of relief in both my head and body, and my head didn't hurt at all." The King of Jin looked at him with a dim gaze. The assistant doctor's gray beard trembled with excitement. "I've been struggling to enter the threshold these past few days, but guess what, Prince? Just now when I entered the gate of the royal mansion, the old man almost jumped in. These old arms and legs are obviously too relaxed for him to ignore." Along the way, he recalled several times what Lu Zhaoling had done and exclaimed, "Xuanxue. This matter will not be disclosed for the time being," the King of Jin whispered. He is now delving deeper into Lu Zhaoling's exploration. Understood. However, Lord, let's first say that Miss Lu has saved the old man's life. I have to protect her from now on. The King of Jin smiled blankly as he looked at the obvious protective expression of the old assistant doctor. That girl is quite impressive. In less than a day of returning to Beijing, she found 2 backers for herself. Even the old assistant doctor, who has a bad temper, now looks like he will fight with anyone who dares to bully her. It's really amazing. The auxiliary doctor specifically told him this, which was also a hint to him not to bully that girl, right? Dr. Fu talked about the Lu family again. The Lu Ming family left Miss Lu in the countryside for 10 years without caring about her. This time, when they took her back to Beijing, their attitude towards her was also very bad, and they even arranged a shabby room for her. A dilapidated house. The assistant doctor immediately and harshly accused the Lu family of this matter. No one knows better than him how careful and vengeful the man in front of him is. The Lu Ming family offended him, and there will definitely be no good fruit to eat in the future. However, Miss Lu is really smart and weak. She knows how to use the old man's strength to make them change their house. It's just her injury, it's too serious. It's really not good without someone to be attentive around. He didn't say anything, the injury was clearly going to kill. I don't know why Lu Zhaoling didn't die. Chapter 8. Marrying You. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The King of Jin chuckled lightly. It seems that the assistant doctor has a great impression of her. After coming for so long, he has already praised her several times. The old man always tells the truth, said the assistant doctor. Lu Zhaoling is indeed clever. Don't worry about this. I have already sent 2 maids to her, taught by Grandma Qing herself. She should be careful. That's good, that's good. The assistant doctor indeed breathed a sigh of relief, but then thought of something and couldn't help but look at the King of Jin, his eyes flashing. How did Prince and Miss Lu get to know each other? You are very special to her. She said she can save the king. A sentence from the King of Jin instantly dispelled the gossip in the assistant doctor's mind. His expression suddenly became serious. How could Miss Lu know about your physical condition, Prince? He said, looking at the chest of King Jin. Years ago, he saw the eerie spot on the chest of the King of Jin, but he was helpless, so the King of Jin kept searching outside for famous doctors and extraordinary people. She said she could tell. Does the assistant doctor believe it? The auxiliary doctor's expression became even more solemn as he thought about the process of Lu Zhaoling saving him just now. The old man had to believe it. However, after a pause, he couldn't help but say, it's just that this matter is really amazing. Miss Lu, who is only 16 years old and grew up in the countryside, where did she learn this skill? This is also what I want to know. The King of Jin gently stroked a black ring on the middle finger of his left hand. Miss Lu doesn't look like a bad person. The King of Jin couldn't help but laugh. He glanced at the assistant doctor and said, the assistant doctor is not young anymore. He even said such innocent words. Can one tell at a glance whether a person is good or bad? It seems that the girl's skills were good, and she immediately won over the assistant doctor's heart. I have lived for decades and have seen many people. Miss Lu's eyes are clear and she is definitely not a deceitful person, said the assistant doctor. The King of Jin did not argue with him, but simply spoke lightly. Since the assistant doctor likes her, let's go back and prepare a generous gift. Prepare a gift. What gift? I am about to be engaged to Miss Lu, and you are not allowed to give gifts as an old man. What? Betrothal. Outside, the butler and Qing Mama exchanged a glance. Look, another person who was hit by the news of the prince and shouted loudly to the point of breaking the sound. Imperial Palace. The Empress Dowager leaned against a soft couch, with a eunuch kneeling beside her with rosy lips and white teeth, gently pressing her legs. Someone rushed in. Empress Dowager, the King of Jin has returned to the capital. The Empress Dowager sat up without hesitation. What are you saying? Why did he suddenly return to Beijing? No one has received any prior information, and now the King of Jin has returned to his mansion. I believe he will enter the palace soon, said the palace attendant. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth and said, it must be the Emperor who summoned him back to the capital. Even though he has already been watched, how can he still be sent a letter? The Supreme Emperor was seriously ill and had been bedridden for 2 months. People with intentions were secretly waiting for the news of his return to heaven. Who knew that at this time, the King of Jin had returned to the capital? What can the King of Jin do when he returns to the capital? Even the old man Fuyuan cannot cure the emperor, and the return of the King of Jin is in vain. The Empress Dowager calmed down again and waved her sleeve as she sat down. However, I do remember. Didn't Xuanxue have admired the King of Jin since childhood? Go and summon her to the palace. I'll ask that child if she still wants to become the Queen of Jin. Yes. Xuanxue, the daughter of Qiang+Sweet, just turned 16 this year and was born dignified and beautiful. She was supposed to talk about marriage, but she has been waiting for the King of Jin, which is almost well known in the privileged circles. Mainly because the Empress Dowager had tacitly agreed, and she had hinted to them that when the King of Jin returned to the capital, she would marry them. So Shenxiang's whole family almost accepted this marriage. Upon hearing the call of the Empress Dowager, Qiang+Sweet dared not neglect and quickly dressed up and entered the palace. After seeing the palace maid leading the way, she stuffed a small purse and whispered, "Did the Empress Dowager summon me alone today, or did other young ladies come with her?" Only Miss Shen was summoned. The little palace maid pinched her purse. Miss Shen has always been generous in her actions, and she wisely added, "I heard that the King of Jin has returned to the capital, and he should also enter the palace later. That's why the Empress Dowager summoned Miss Shen into the palace." Has the King of Jin returned? Upon hearing this news, Qiang+Sweet was both surprised and delighted, and her face turned a little red with excitement. Because the King of Jin was about to enter the palace, the Empress Dowager only called her here. Thinking of the Empress Dowager holding her hand a few years ago, praising her beautiful appearance and being a perfect match for the King of Jin, Qiang+Sweet's heart skipped a beat. The Empress Dowager must be giving her a marriage, right? It's not a waste of her years of putting in a lot of effort to give gifts to the Empress Dowager on various festivals, learning her favorite tea, making double-sided embroidery skills, and so on. The Empress Dowager's mother truly loves her. Qiang+Sweet suppressed his excitement and met the Empress Dowager, still bowing and bowing perfectly. My daughter pays her respects to the Empress Dowager, who is blessed with peace and prosperity. Get up quickly. The Empress Dowager lifted her hand and looked at Qiang+Sweet with a kind smile. It's been a while since we last saw each other. The girl from the Shen family is so lively again, just like a flower. Qiang+Sweet lowered her head slightly and said, "Only the Empress Dowager is like a flower, like a peony with beautiful scenery." Ha ha ha, your little mouth is sweet. Qiang+Sweet is 16 years old this year, isn't she? Your parents should be worried. It's already time for someone else's family to propose a marriage at this age. It's really for her marriage. Qiang+Sweet's cheeks were hot. "Empress Dowager, I'm not in a hurry." How could you not be in a hurry? The Empress Dowager waved to her and held her hand. I know your thoughts, this girl. The King of Jin has returned to the capital. I'll ask you what you mean now, so as not to randomly order the Mandarin duck genealogy later. Empress Dowager. Qiang+Sweet blushed and lowered her head. Qiang+Sweet is entirely at the mercy of the Empress Dowager. Okay, then I'll make this master for you. Let's quickly appoint the King of Jin to avoid being snatched by others. Empress Dowager, the King of Jin has entered the palace. A palace attendant came in and reported. Qiang+Sweet suddenly lifted his head, unable to conceal his excitement. He really entered the palace. Her heart has been tied to him for 8 years. In this life, she only wants to marry him. Did he go to the Emperor's place? After returning to the Empress Dowager, the King of Jin first went to the Imperial study. The Empress Dowager stood up and pulled Qiang+Sweet. I still remember his elder brother. Coincidentally, we also went to the Imperial study and had the Emperor immediately issue an order to marry him. Outside the Imperial study, the King of Jin, sitting on a walking carriage, looked at the bright yellow figure standing at the door, his lips lightly raised. Did you still welcome him out? The Emperor walked up to him with excitement and shouted, I've waited for you to come back. Over the years, I've been thinking of you all the time. Brother, haven't seen you for many years. You've grown old and your face has wrinkles, sighed the King of Jin, shaking his head. The Emperor froze. Chapter 9. Reputation Coercion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Which emperor wouldn't mind others saying he's old? Sitting on the mountains and rivers, the greatest ruler wants to maintain youth, strength, and longevity. The emperor served as the crown prince for nearly 40 years, and the emperor never died. He finally fell ill and ascended to the throne. It has only been 2 years since then. In the second year of the new emperor's reign, I heard the king of Jin say that he was so old that he had wrinkles on his face, and that he was truly murderous. So he doesn't like this little emperor brother, and as he grows up, he hates him even more. I am 20 years older than you, so naturally I am a bit more mature than you. The emperor held himself in reverence. His concubines say he looks very young, looks like he's in his 30s, and he's also very imposing on the dragon bed. Humph, we must never be hit by the king of Jin as soon as we meet. He must hold on. Well, my dear brother is running for 5. The king of Jin naturally continued. The emperor almost cried. Ayu, come in quickly and have a good chat with me. Where have you been all these years? What's interesting about you? I have been dealing with so many things every day, and I can't even take a step out of this palace. I envy you for your freedom and freedom. The emperor called him into the imperial study. As he stepped over the threshold, the king of Jin said in a flat tone, Brother, I won't talk about it for now. Let's give me a marriage first. Puff. The emperor stumbled underfoot and almost tripped over the threshold. The attendant was startled and quickly came to help. Your Majesty. The emperor stood firm, and the king of Jin walked in calmly with one hand on his back, glancing around the imperial study. Ayu, what did you say just now? It seems like I heard you wrong. You said you wanted to get married. Well, the emperor didn't hear you wrong. Didn't you write to your father before, saying that you were wandering around and not even a mother mosquito would bite you? This was said by the supreme emperor. The emperor has always been worried that his youngest son will not marry in this lifetime and will live alone until old age. The handsome face of Lu Zhaoling appeared in King Jin's mind, with a curl on his lips. Yes, who knew there were little foxes in the capital? Xingpu is very fierce. He is a person who keeps his promise and will not back out if he promises to cooperate. Little fox. The emperor was not foolish either. Upon hearing this, he knew he was referring to the girl who was going to be married. Which family's girl is it? The king of Jin was about to speak when the palace attendants outside shouted, The Empress Dowager is here. Has Queen Mother arrived? The emperor stood up. I believe she must have been thrilled and happy to hear that you have returned. The king of Jin's eyes were dim. The Empress Dowager brought Xuanxue in and her gaze immediately fell on the king of Jin. The last time I saw the king of Jin, he was still a teenager. The king of Jin in front of him now is a tall and dignified adult man. He stands next to the emperor, half a head taller than the emperor. His deep purple brocade robe accentuates his noble aura, making the emperor wearing a dragon robe appear a bit greasy and lewd. How infuriating! I heard the chirping of the joyful sparrow this morning. Indeed, there is a happy event. The king of Jin has returned. The Empress Dowager looked at the king of Jin and lightly pressed the corner of her eyes with a silk cloth, her voice choking up a bit. A few days ago, I dreamt of you. After waking up, I was worried that I wouldn't eat well. Now that I see you doing well, I feel at ease. Does this mean dreaming that something happened to him? The Empress Dowager remained the same as before, enjoying every opportunity to curse him, but her expression was impeccable, and she was really excited and happy about his return. Don't worry, Empress Dowager. I will be fine and won't let you worry, said the king of Jin. After Xuanxue came in and saluted, she stood aside and looked at the king of Jin, her eyes slightly turning red. King Jin is so dazzling and handsome now. His eyebrows, eyes, and facial features all grew on her favorite spot. When the Empress Dowager saw King Jin, she forgot about her. Xuanxue stepped forward and bowed to King Jin, her voice also soft. Xuanxue has met the King of Jin. The Empress Dowager only then remembered her, her spirit lifted, and she immediately said, "Do you still remember Xuanxue, the King of Jin? As the daughter of Xuanxue, you were childhood sweethearts and childhood sweethearts." The King of Jin's gaze fell lightly on Xuanxue's face. The Emperor looked at the Empress Dowager and then at Xuanxue, and also understood. It is not a secret for Xuanjianu to have admired the King of Jin since she was young. "I understand now. You two entered the palace at the same time for the same thing, right?" The Emperor chuckled teasingly. "Mother, just now Ayu was preparing to discuss the decree of marriage with me." The Empress Dowager and Xuanxue both shook and looked at the King of Jin in shock. The decree of marriage. Xuanxue was greatly surprised in her heart. She dared not think that the first thing the King of Jin did when he returned to the capital was to ask for her marriage. But if it weren't for her, who else could it be? Over the years, she has been sending people to keep an eye on the news of the King of Jin, clearly saying that there are no girls around him. "Now that I see Shenxiang's daughter, I remember that Master Yuanzhen once approved Ayu's marriage and calculated Ayu's destined wife's 8 characters. That 8 character is yours, right?" the Emperor asked Xuanxue. "That's right, it's because of this incident back then that even the Crown Prince and Shenxiang's family assumed that the Prince of Jin and Xuanxue would be a perfect match. Otherwise, Shenxiang could not have kept his daughter until 16 and had not yet arranged a marriage proposal for her." Returning to the Emperor, what Master Yuanzhen said back then was indeed the birth date and 8 characters of my daughter. My daughter is entirely determined by the Emperor. Xuanxue immediately knelt down decisively, his hands pressed to the ground, his forehead also lowered, and a posture of waiting for the Emperor's marriage. She felt extremely anxious just now, thinking that the marriage she had been waiting for was about to have an accident, so now whether she lost face or not, she must first obtain this holy marriage proposal. When Xuanxue was young, she always followed behind the King of Jin and called out, "Brother Shiryu." The Empress Dowager covered her mouth and chuckled lightly. For so many years, she has been waiting for the King of Jin to return to the capital. It's truly precious. Your Majesty, you must fulfill this marriage. I also have a good view of them. Ayu is not young this year, and this matter cannot be delayed. I will marry them now. The King of Jin's face was cold and indifferent. I want to marry someone else. Xuanxue's body trembled and his mind hummed. King Jin, half a year ago, the Supreme Emperor personally agreed to let me enter the Prince Jin's mansion. She looked up and a string of tears rolled down her face. If you don't believe me, you can ask him about it. The King of Jin's long eyebrows furrowed. The Empress Dowager chuckled inwardly, how did I forget about this? This is true. At that time, the Emperor passed out in the ancestral temple, and it was Xuanxue who happened to save him. When the Emperor woke up, he said that seeing this girl with a kind and pure face, she was a fortunate person and insisted on giving her to you. It is something that the Supreme Emperor can do. After my daughter returned home, she had already reported this matter to her parents, but I didn't know if there were guests present at the time, so they heard about it. Now it has spread widely. Xuanxue's tears fell down again. If it turns into a joke in the end, I'm afraid I won't have the face to go out in the capital. Chapter 10. Even if it's a burst of joy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Emperor narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Xuanxue. Although for so many years, he has been accustomed to going against the will of the King of Jin in everything. As long as the King of Jin doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want it, or dislikes it, he wants to go against it. But seeing Shenxiang's daughter so eager to marry the King of Jin, he still had some doubts. Shenxiang has always been loyal to him. In theory, Xuanxue should be promised to the crown prince or other princes, so that their relationship between the monarch and the subjects will be closer. But Shenxiang actually tacitly accepted his daughter's request to marry the King of Jin. What benefits does this have for Xuanxue? Can it be said that he has been playing the role of a good imperial brother for so many years, making Xuanxue mistakenly believe that he really has a deep brotherly relationship with the King of Jin? Xuanxue is a famous talented woman in the capital city. If you don't have the face to go out, you can stay indoors, said the King of Jin expressionlessly. Hiss. This is truly ruthless. Xuanxue was so shocked that she forgot to cry. Prince. The Empress Dowager couldn't help but ask, which girl does the King of Jin want to marry? Is it the beautiful confidant he has met outside in recent years? At this opening, the person that the King of Jin wants to marry is defined as a woman who is neither good nor bad. Who is a serious daughter who can be a man's confidant? Your Majesty has vomited blood. A sudden shout came from outside, causing their faces to change. At the same time, the sky was shrouded in dark clouds, and the sky quickly darkened. It was pitch black, as if wind and rain were about to come. This sudden change in the sky also made the emperor somewhat frightened. And the King of Jin had already rushed out quickly. Qingfeng, who was guarding outside, caught up with him nervously as he walked quickly and lowered his voice, "Prince, your legs." The prince can only walk slowly in his daily life and cannot walk much, otherwise his leg bones will ache deeply. Now he is walking so fast. Go and invite the auxiliary doctor. The King of Jin ordered in a low voice. Quickly, set up the Ningxiu Palace. The Emperor and Empress Dowager also hurriedly chased after them. Xuanxue hesitated for a moment, bit his lower lip, and chased after him. In the Ningxiu Palace of the Supreme Emperor, there was a strong medicinal smell, and in addition to the medicinal smell, there was also a faint odor that was unknown. 2 years ago, the Supreme Emperor suddenly fell ill, and since then he has been on a whim, occasionally going out, but occasionally fainting. Recently, he has been bedridden. The figure of the King of Jin rushed into the Ningxiu Palace, and the old eunuch Fu Gonggang, who had been guarding the emperor, burst into tears. King Jin has returned to the capital. He quickly knelt down for King Jin. The old slave kowtowed to the King of Jin. Fu Gong is exempt from gifts. King Jin said and quickly walked to the bed. The Supreme Emperor on the bed had white hair all over his head, and he was a bit thin and disfigured. His face was also covered in old age spots, and his breath was like flowing silk. There are still a few bloodstains on the blanket. Father. The King of Jin knelt down by the bed and held the hand of the emperor. As soon as he touched it, he was startled. The emperor's hand was as cold as ice. He went too far this time to find a doctor, and didn't have time to receive a letter from the capital. When he received the last letter and returned, he found out that the emperor had become seriously ill. Fu Gonggang wiped his tears and said, "Your Highness, the emperor has been looking forward to your return." He had something to say before, but when he saw the Empress Dowager and the others rushing in, he swallowed the rest. How is father's emperor doing? Where is the imperial physician? As soon as the emperor entered, he sternly questioned and scanned the Ningxiu Palace. He saw several palace members kneeling with red eyes, and smelled the lingering smell of blood inside the palace, which made him feel a little excited. Is the old thing finally going to die? He has been waiting for this day for a long time. The imperial physicians are all discussing prescriptions in the side hall, said Duke Fu. Several imperial doctors rushed over and knelt down with a crash. Your Majesty, I am in a state of panic. The Supreme Emperor is afraid that it is. The imperial physician dared not look up, his voice trembling. In the past 2 years, they have only been able to slow down the illness of the emperor, but in the end, there is still no way. Now, watching the emperor run out of oil, the lamp has dried up. Half a month ago, the emperor insisted on going to the ancestral temple even though he was still full of energy, the emperor said angrily. Why did you say it's not working after only half a month? The Empress Dowager cried and rushed to the bed, trying to get close, but the King of Jin knelt in front of the bed, making it impossible for her to approach. "You open your eyes and look at me," she choked up, as if she was still a loving couple with him. "Your Majesty," the Emperor insisted on going to the ancestral temple at that time, but the officials also tried their best to dissuade him. That day, the Emperor did not improve his health, but instead forced himself to go with his sick body. "Yes, Your Majesty. Half a month ago, on that day, the capital was filled with flying sand and rocks, and there was a sudden rain afterwards. The Emperor also fainted at the ancestral temple. I'm afraid it was that trip that worsened his condition. Half a month ago, on that day, the weather was very strange, with occasional rumbling sounds in the sky. The city was filled with flying sand, rocks, and strange winds, and several people were killed by falling trees. Talking about that day, many people still have lingering palpitations. But that day, the Supreme Emperor insisted on going to the ancestral temple and did not let anyone follow him into the palace. If it weren't for Xuanxue's intention to recite the Heart Sutra for praying for the Empress Dowager that day, who happened to pass by, the Supreme Emperor would have fainted in the palace and no one would have noticed it in time. The King of Jin tightly held the hand of the Supreme Emperor and secretly lost his internal strength. His eyes turned slightly red as he looked at the old man who had lost the imperial demeanor of a few years ago. "Father, I'm back." Perhaps with his inner strength, the Emperor struggled to open his eyes. During the Great Zhou dynasty, there was a need for chaos. The voice of the Supreme Emperor was hoarse and low, only the King of Jin kneeling beside him could hear it. The Empress Dowager and Emperor both wanted to come closer and listen, only to see his lips twitching slightly. "Father, I will definitely find a divine medicine to cure you," the Emperor exclaimed urgently. "Shut up," the King of Jin drank heavily. The Emperor widened his eyes and was about to jump up, but dared to tell him to shut up. He just wants to interrupt the Emperor and prevent him from saying anything to the King of Jin. But in front of so many people, he can't make it too obvious. I dreamt that our ancestors had a dream that the dragon veins of the Great Zhou were broken. You promised me to protect the Great Zhou." The Supreme Emperor spoke intermittently. "Emperor, you can't just leave like this. You haven't seen the King of Jin get married and have children yet," the Empress Dowager exclaimed urgently. She turned her eyes to see Xuanxue outside and immediately called her, "Xuanxue, come here." Xuanxue's heart was pounding in her throat. Could this be her chance? She didn't care about her manners and immediately ran in, being dragged by the Empress Dowager to the bedside. "Emperor Tai, this is the daughter of Xuanxue. Have you promised her to the King of Jin? How about having the Emperor marry them immediately?" She pressed Xuanxue's shoulder, and he immediately knelt down and knelt beside the King of Jin. "King Jin, even if it's Chongxi, Xuanxue has no complaints.